Hello guys, welcome to the joint placement tutorial for the rigging, and we're gonna create all the joints for this character. Now joint placement is actually one of the very important parts of a rigging, and I'm sorry that I didn't do it because in this tutorial series it was actually created for the purpose of supporting my rigging class in UIW. And because of that, we did the joint placement already in class, so I just don't think it's that necessary now. But apparently a lot of YouTubers are asking for those, so I'm gonna do that now just to make it complete. All right, so let's start with creating joint for the span. The joint creating command will be underneath rigging skeleton create joints, and you can go start clicking and clicking and clicking and clicking. That's gonna allow you to create a chain of joints. Now a joint chain is just like a parenting system. You have children and parents. That should be it. And if you're doing that in the perspective view, though, if you don't have any snapping on, it will be on the ground. So I'm not going to do that here. What I'm going to do here is go to the right view, and I'm going to create a joint from this side. Also, I'm going to turn on the joint X-ray so I can actually see them. It's actually easier to just do them in the wireframe sometimes. I'm going to go from here where the root is, and holding on shift and drag a few times, and that's going to give me let's say 6 joints. Alright. Now why do I choose here? Well, this is actually the pivot. You rotate the hip. If you make it too high, then the hip will be rotated based on that pivot, so the hip pivot will be a little weird. If it's too low, then it's going to affect the top part in the opposite direction, which is also going to be weird. So it's your choice to figure out where it is, and there's no specific ways of telling you where it is. My experience with this guy though is actually just underneath the belt a little bit, and sometimes you don't really know because the character could be having different kind of volume, different kind of length, different kind of hip, so that sometimes it takes some trials to see which one is the best. Again, this is going to be the pivot where this hip will be rotated based on. Now another problem I want to fix is that my joint chain are not equally distant, or they're not the same length. It's actually very easy to fix because the length of the joints or of every segment is actually the children's translate X. If I type in 0, you see that joint goes on top of the parent. So this length here is actually how long the joint is. You can actually change that. You can see the difference here, right? So what I can do is make them the same value. That's going to give me guaranteed the same length. All right, that sounds good enough. Probably a little bit more, like 5 or so. 5 is probably too much. 3.5. Right. I want it to be stopping at where the rib cage starts. Okay, so that's problem 1 I'm having on this joint chain. Another problem I'm having is that if you go grab all the joint one by one, or go select hierarchy and go display, transform display local rotation axis, you will see all those axes. Now the last joint is very different. Now that's not what I want to actually have, because when I'm bending my joints, right, when I'm bending those joints, I want them to be bending towards the same direction, but if I bend them, you can see now the top one is doing something quite differently. So I don't really want that, and that's why I'm going to actually also make this one the same as the parent. Now there is a very easy fix. You just need to zero out the joint orient on all X, Y, Z 3 directions so that the joint will go aligned with the parent. Okay, now you may wonder, what is this joint orient? Well, let me actually do some demonstration here on the grid. Let's say I'm creating a joint like this. Right. If you look at this joint, it has some very interesting features. Its rotation is 0 here, and this guy is always also 0, and this guy is also 0. Now you know that it's actually impossible for other objects to do that. If you go create some modeling thing, like a cube here, right? And this cube can't actually do that. If I want this cube to be facing that way, like this joint does, actually I can do that by grabbing the cube and the joint and do modify, match transformation, match rotation. And now their rotation are the same, but if you look at the values here, this cube will have to have that rotation x as 45, and this joint just don't have that. Now why is it even possible, right? Because if I want the rotation to be 0, I can do modify freeze transformation, but that's gonna bring the axis back, right? So there's no way you can maintain the rotation the orientation tilted this way, but still maintaining the rotation values to be 0, but somehow the joint is doing it. Now the reason for that is because that 45 degree, instead of having being placed on the rotation value, it's actually on the joint orient value right here, and that's why I can do that. And if you look at other joint, it's basically the same thing. So the rotation remains at 0. The actual orientation that needed to be changed will be actually stored in this joint orient value. Okay, now why do we even need that on the joint? Well, the reason is actually pretty simple, because that when you are rigging or doing any animation, you want the controller to be 0, 0, 0 on the rotation, so you always can go back and you can always rotate towards the direction you want to go for without affecting others, because they're all clean. So that's why we need them to be clean, and that's why we have this extra joint section with this joint orient here to help you to do that. Okay, so let me delete this joint and the cube so we can move on. Alright, after creating this joint, I'm gonna go ahead and do the renaming. I'm gonna go modify, search, and replace names. Search for joint. I'm gonna rename this with JT span underscore 0 and apply. That's gonna name them from 01 to 06. Of course, you can rename the first one to be JT root if that's what you desire. So all the naming here can be very flexible. I do it almost very differently sometimes because I don't remember what I did earlier. Because, you know, as long as those are making sense to you, they should work just fine. Okay, alright, so that's gonna be the joint chain for the span. Now for the rib cage, because it's a solid piece in series, so I'm not gonna create any joint in the middle. Let me start actually creating the neck. For the neck, I'm gonna go from where the neck starts, holding down shift and go up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, that seems like a lot already. Maybe I don't need that much. So let me delete one of those by holding down right mouse button, go to edit joints and remove. I'm just gonna get rid of that one, and I can then tilt the joint chain. Now notice that when I'm doing that, the joint have rotations. So like what I mentioned earlier, it will be better to have them all be 0. So I'm gonna actually directly go here and change the joint orient to rotate it this way. Right, and then I'm gonna make them the same length. It's the same easy trick here, just change translate x to be the same thing, like 3 or so. Alright, so that's gonna be probably too high. Let me change that back to 2.5. It's probably better. Alright, so that's my neck joints. Again, if you go select hierarchy and go display, transform display local rotation axis, you will see that they're like this. And let's take a look at the last one. It's also kind of wrong, right? So I'm gonna go ahead and change that by zeroing out the joint orient value. Now they're all the same, and I'm gonna go ahead and rename those joints. Search and replace name. This is gonna be the neck. Alright, and the last one, I'm gonna actually name it head, because that's the beginning of the head. Okay. Now to connect those two, I just need to parent my neck 01 to the span 05, so that is all parented. Okay. Now this guy here, because it's the head joint, you may want to consider, like, do I want it to be tilted this way? Because that's gonna be how the animation will like you rotate the head. So you can of course make your own choice. I will actually choose to make it go directly up, and there's an easy way to do that. Is go to create joint again and then click on this guy. That's going to tell Maya to start from here, and then you can hold it down shift to go up. Now what this does is Maya will automatically reorient this joint to make it face to the next joint, and the next joint of course will be on top, so that's why this joint is completely vertical now. And for this last guy, I'm going to zero out again the joint orient to make it aligned with the head joint, and that's going to be the head joint. Let me rename this guy JT head end, which is going to be the last joint of the head. Alright, so for the last one in the middle, it's going to be the jaw joint. We can go from where the jaw starts to the end of the jaw, and we can rename this joint chain JT jaw and JT jaw and I can power this joint chain back to the head joint, and eventually I can probably also do the eye right now. So for the eye, I can do it in a very different way. I can go create joint and holding down V to snap it there, and then holding down shift to go forward, and then I can go to the front view holding down V again while moving it to snap it to the middle too. So that's gonna make this joint, whoops, that's not what I want. Sorry, holding down V, drag it across this direction, and then move it to the center of maybe the back of that this back vertex. That's gonna guarantee that this joint is now at where the eyeball center. And I can power this joint again back to the head joint, and I can rename this guy JT left because it's on the left side of her, and the end joint will just be renamed to left eye end. Now there are different kind of habit people have. Let me change the translate axis to make it go longer. People have different habit on these kind of things. So some people will name this end, will name other joint with a underscore band to band stuff. I found that is kind of like something maybe like an overkill, because I will band out the joint to the skin anyways. I don't care if this one is holding some little bit of weighting. I can always transfer it or clean it up. It's gonna give me better initial weighting though. Alright, for this one I'm gonna zero out the values again just to make it land with the jaw joint. This guy, I can also do the same thing. Alright, so that's gonna be the joint from the hip all the way to the head. Alright. Now for the other eye, I can just grab this joint and do a skeleton underneath rigging, skeleton mirror joints. That's gonna allow me to mirror. I'm gonna search for left and replace with right, and do that, apply, and that's gonna mirror it across the YZ plane, and also rename it to the right side, which is perfect for me. Alright, so that's gonna be the easy part of the joint placement. Alright, let's move on to the leg. I'm gonna go to the front view, and then go to the right view actually, and go create the leg. The leg becomes a little bit trickier. Let me show you why. Now let me do the right way here first. I'm gonna go from where the leg starts bending to the knee and to the ankle. Alright. Now let me show you some of the things you guys may have done wrong. One of the things you guys will do sometimes is that you create the joints, always make sure that it's matching in the middle of the leg. So what you end up with is something like this. And notice that this joint chain has some fundamental difference compared to the joint chain I created earlier, which is this joint chain is actually slightly bending backwards. And if I have done that intentionally, if I don't, let me just do a few changes just to make it more visible. Right. So now why is that important? Because if you go ahead and do the IK, which I haven't shown you yet, but let's just do it, the IK go from the beginning of the joint chain to the end. That's the IK applied on the first joint chain I created. Let me do a other IK, again go from the beginning by clicking there and click on the end. Now let's take a look at those two IKs and how they behave. If you drag it up, you can see now those two legs are bending towards two different directions. My first leg is bending forward because it is already bending forward a little bit. The other leg, because it's already bending backwards, it will bend backwards. Okay. Now let's look at some very interesting scenario. Sometimes you may find out that your model is like modeled in a straight way, so your joint has to be like this, so it's straight. Let's take a look at what will happen here on this guy. Now if you drag the IK handle up, you can see now it's actually not doing anything. Now we have three different situations. One is bending forward, one is bending backwards, another one doesn't really do anything at all. Maybe you can rotate it, but that's it. So which one should you go, right? The obvious easy way is just make it bending forward a little bit so that Maya already knows how to bend it. If your joint has to be straight, you can still save it by rotating the joint a little bit like that to tell Maya you want it to be bending this way. Holding down rightmost button, set preferred angle. That's gonna tell Maya, okay, that's where I want it to bend. And then you can go ahead and zero out the rotation Y. And then you drag it up, you can see now it knows where to bend. Alright. You probably are wondering, can I do that on this bending backward thing? Let's actually try that. So let me rotate this joint this way and tell Maya, okay, this is my preferred angle. And then zero it out to move it back. Now let's see what happens here. If I go ahead and drag this second IK handle here, you can see now it bends forward, but if you go back, you can see now it's being automatically moved a little bit just to make that bending possible. Now why is that? Why does Maya have to do that bending for you? The reason is because that IK, if you really look at this guy and drag it downwards, you can see now IK is actually incapable of bending towards the other direction. That's just the limitation of it. You cannot go beyond this straight rotation. You cannot bend the other way at all. You can only bend one direction. Now, to fulfill that, this IK have to be moved to slightly bending forward to fulfill your need of this preferred angle to bend forward. So that's why this one will actually give you a lot of values on the joint if you force Maya to bend forward by using set preferred angle. So anyway, best scenario, or the things you can choose is either making your joint chain straight or bending forward like this. Try to avoid bending backwards because it's just impossible to fix. Alright. Now there's a lot of things I have to that was a lot of things, but I think that's really important and worth mentioning. So let me drag this leg actually closer to my actual leg. Alright. Now let's talk about something a little bit more advanced here. Whoops. Let's talk about something, whoops, don't really want to see that. Let's talk about something called the joint orient. Okay. Joint orient is what's happening here. Let me zero that out, just like what I did earlier on these guys. Now, another very interesting thing about joint orient is that Maya sometimes gives you some sort of a wrong joint orient. Let's take a look at this joint chain Maya gives you. I can take a look at the rotation Z here. Right, that's how you bend, or bend your leg. Now let's take a look at this bending. Now it looks like Z direction is the bending direction, but there is a major difference between these two though. If you go forward direction or positive direction on this rotation Z is going forward, let's take a look at this guy. It's actually bending backwards. Now why is that? Because if you look at the axis here, let me select the hierarchy and go display, transform display local rotation axis. You can see now the axis here on the hip is actually very different compared to the ones on the knee. Right? This is actually not ideal because that means when you're animating positive direction and negative direction on rotation Z means two different bending directions because they're flipped. So you probably wanted to flip it back. Right? You can choose to flip these guys or flip this guy. I'm gonna choose to try to flip the top guy. So I'm gonna unparent the children here, grab this guy. I'm gonna flip it to the other direction. That's gonna be on the X direction. Let me zero that out. See, now the Z is facing there, which is not cool. Negative 90 maybe. Yeah, that's gonna be the same. I'm gonna parent the joints back. Okay. So joint orange, something very important. The first rule is consistency, so that the same joint chain on the leg, you want the same axis and the same positive and negative direction to do the same thing. Be aware of that. Check your orientation all the time, because Maya sometimes may get confused and give you some very bad initial orientations. What Maya gives you never really matters. It's just something that they try to do that for you, but oftentimes you will find problem in there. Alright, so that's one thing about joint orientation. Another thing about joint orientation is that why do you choose to make it orient this way, right? That's basically actually depending on the animation needs. So in this case, the knee are supposed to be able to bend this way, right? That's why you have this axis to be like this way. And it actually doesn't bend the other direction, so the others doesn't really matter that much. But this guy actually is having some issue. Why is that? Because the foot is actually flat, right? The foot is lying flat on the ground, and somehow you're giving the ankle a rotation axis like this. So that's not ideal either. You want this axis to be more like this, right? So how do I fix that? What I can do is actually like this. I can shift P to parent it. That's gonna bring it to the word hierarchy, and you'll see that you have a lot of values changed in the joint orient. We can actually compare that. That's before parenting. On parenting, you see it's all 0 because the parent now is where it's being aligned to. But if you shift P to unparent this guy, you see the things has changed because that its parent is now the word. So that the word axis is different compared to this guy, and that's why you're having joint orient values. Now it's very obvious on how to fix it. Just type in zeros on this value here called 8.9. Now the reason I know it's the one that's because the x-axis is slightly tilted there, and that's going to be the only value. Other values are 90 degrees, so they're guaranteed to be flat anyways. So that's going to fix that. I'm going to parent this guy back to the knee. Alright, that's going to be an ideal axis for my ankle. Let me move on to the foot. For the foot, I'm going to go create joints, go from where the toe bends to the end. I can actually make it go up a little bit because that's how that thing is being, pointed. And zero that orient again here. And then go to the front view, and I can hold down V button and drag it to snap it back to the ankle and parent it to the ankle joint. And that's going to be everything I need for the leg. Now let's check some of the axes here too. And you can see now the axes are actually not the same, right? Z is this way and the other Z is that way, so I probably need to also twist it. I'm going to tap in 180 here on the X just to flip it. Now you can see Z is facing outwards, Y is facing to the back, and X is facing down the joint chain. So now they're consistent. Okay, I hope those things make sense to you. If they doesn't, then I probably need to, do some do some more thinking about why we do this. Oh, here I can maybe zero all of those out. Let's take a look at what's happening. Well, that's not quite nice actually. I guess I cannot do that. Let me take a look at that. If I zero this guy out, the Y direction, yeah, that's how I bring it back. So I guess I have to do it this way then. Alright. Anyway, there are a lot of theories about how this orange should work. My theory is simple. Consistency first, so that they're all doing the same thing, and they are oriented in the direction that is supposed to be the animation, what the animation needs. There's another rule here which I will reveal you later, but for now that's the two rules, right? Consistency and all the orange directions are proper for the animation needs. All right, that's gonna be the join chain. I'm gonna rename this guy JT left hip knee, and this is gonna be the ankle, and this is gonna be the toe, and this is gonna be the whoops. I'm gonna name this guy ball, and I'm gonna name this guy the toe. Right. Okay. And then parent back. Whoops. To the hip, and then mirror it. Oops. Mirror join. Alright. Now let's talk about something that looks kind of like wrong here. If you look at those two joint chains, that the other joint we mirrored from the left side, the right side here, seems like very different compared to the left side. Now, is that wrong? The answer is it's actually correct. Now, the reason why they are flipped on this direction is because when we're doing the mirroring, let me actually show you again. We're choosing this behavior mirror function, and that's what gives you. Now, what is behavior? Behavior means if you rotate them on the same kind of like value, for example, this time let me try y here. When y goes positive, they're spreading the leg out, and that's behaviorally doing the same thing. And let me actually show you what the other orientation way is. If you do that, you can see now those two joint chains are exactly having the same joint orientation. But it's probably not what we want, because if you go ahead and do the rotation on the y again, it's doing this, right? So oftentimes we want the orientation behavior to be in a behavior symmetry way, not the orientation symmetry way. All right, let me do that. Okay, so they're supposed to be different. All right. Now, another thing I want to talk about is you probably are also wondering why this guy is having Z facing this way, but the leg is having the Z facing the other way, right? Is there any rules that you should follow? What's the difference, right, between X, Y, and Z, three axes? Or is there even any different? The answer is yes, there is a difference. The difference will be actually underneath or related to this rotation order here. Okay, now what is rotation order? In the mathematical thing underneath any object in Maya, even a cube here, you actually does have that rotation order. Now, rotation order actually is what's actually underneath the rotation you're having. In number of operations, when you're rotating your object, it seems like you just need to just need to rotate those axes, and they're just like sticking together always the directions you want them to be, right? That seems like no problem. But let's look at something actually really strange here. This cube here. Let me do something quite interesting. I'm going to rotate this on Z direction, right? And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate it on Y direction. Now watch what happens. The Y value changes, right? Now let's look ahead. Let's go ahead and do the X-axis and rotate a little bit. Right, all three values are changing. Now let's go back to rotate the Y-axis. Now you can see something really strange here. Both, actually all three axes here, X, Y, Z, are all changing. And we're only rotating the Y-axis. What should happen is only the Y-axis is doing the rotation, right? This is what's supposed to be happening. But when you drag the Y-axis, both X and Z is changing. Now, why does it have to do that? Let me zero out those rotations, and let me show you what's actually working here. If you hold down E button and holding down leftmost button, you can go change your axis from object to gimbal. Okay. Now let's rotate the Z. You see just the Z axis changes, right? Now watch what happens when I rotate the Y. Now something really interesting happens. When you rotate the Y, x-axis, which is the red one here, actually follows the y, but the z stays stationary. See that? Now let's move on to the x and rotate the x. You can see x-axis rotates, no problem, but none of those other two axes are actually moving with it. And if you go back to rotate y again, now you can see the values of y are only changing, right? When you're in gimbal lock mode, if you go to object mode and you rotate the y, which is actually here, you can see all three have to be rotated. So these axes you're moving in the normal settings, like the object orientation, you are working on a extra layer of rotation. The actual rotation under the hood, those values are not what you're manipulating here. What you did here will be calculated and reflected on those numbers, but these numbers actually are not what you're dragging sometimes. Now the reason for that is because the x, y, z three axes, they are actually not just controlling each other like in the real world, right? Everything is connected by atom, and you know the force between particles. But in the mathematical representation of those geometries in Maya, we cannot just do that because that's too expensive. So what's happening here is that we're actually having this interesting hierarchy happening underneath the in those axes. Let me demonstrate that by creating some maybe torus here. Sorry, this is getting a little long, but I just want to explain everything in detail. So let me make the radius of this guy bigger. I'm going to call this guy x-axis. I'm going to rotate it this way. Alright. And modify freeze transformation. And give it a new material. And make this guy red. Okay. Let me duplicate this guy and rotate it 90 degrees this way. Give it a new material. I'm gonna call this guy the blue guy, sorry, the green guy, which is gonna be the y direction. Whoops. And one more for z. Whoops, too much. Lambert here. I'm gonna rename this guy as Z, or just give it a blue color too. So now I have actually three axes: X, oops, and Y and Z. Oops, what's going on here? Oh, I named this guy Y. Let me name this guy back to Y. Alright, we have three axes, X, Y, Z. Now in reality, they're not just like this, they're not combined like this, so one is controlling the other. They're not like this. What's actually happening is that X, Y, Z is having a hierarchy, and that's what this rotation order is on any object. X, Y, Z means X is underneath Y, Y is underneath Z. So that when you rotate the Z axis, everything follows it. And we'll go ahead and rotate Y. You see now only X is following Y, Z is not moving. That's what's happening before, right? Let's take a look at this guy. We can rotate Z, right? Everything rotates with it. When we rotate Y, only axis rotates with it. So they're basically the same in this case. See that? So that's what rotation order is, and that's actually what's happening in reality or underneath those numbers. That's what those numbers means. Okay, so now if I go ahead and rotate the X, none of the axis changes, right? The same here. Now let me then explain why you can have some really weird value or all three values changing when you're doing the rotation like that. Because when you do it this way, right? See how the three changes? That's because your y-axis here, if you want to rotate along here, right, along this guy, because Z doesn't actually do Z actually doesn't follow Y. If you want the Y to rotate this way, or want this object to rotate on the Y way, because it's already tilted, the y, this y's direction is not the other y's direction though, so you have to do some changing on the z direction to fulfill the direction you're rotating. Those three numbers, remember that they're underneath their hierarchy, so that's why you have all three values changing. So that's gonna be some detail maybe you didn't aware if you're a modeler before but not doing any rigging, and what's happening underneath the hood is actually far more advanced or complicated than you thought. So let me bring these guys back. Whoops, I shouldn't do that. Maybe go, yeah, I can zero this guy out and this guy out. Can probably grab all three. First transformation. I know there is a lot of explanation, but I just want you to be aware of this. So that means because X, Y, Z are underneath their kind of like different hierarchy, so yes, the choice of which one goes which direction does matter. Alright, so what is the Roux? Well, the Roux is actually not that complicated. The Roux will be the Z here in the default settings. It's the grandparent, right? The top parent, which is, you know, this, right? Because it's controlling all other axes, it's gonna be the primary axis or the first axis you rotate when you're animating, and that's why it's called rotation order. The Z goes first, and because it's controlling other two axes, right? So that this one, when you rotate it, it has almost zero problem. So that's why oftentimes, or the rule is that you want the Z direction becomes the primary bending direction of your animation. In this case, the leg's primary bending direction is this, so that's why choosing Z here is actually a good choice. And then the secondary one will be this guy, and it's going to be Y, right? It's going to be Y, and the twisting direction oftentimes is X, and that's why Maya is doing this way for you. The primary bending direction will be Z, secondary will be Y, the last bending direction or rotating direction will be the X. So just follow this rule and you should be much safer, right? Okay, now in this in every rotation here in Maya, there is a problem we call gimbal lock. And what gimbal lock is when you rotate something like you rotate the Y too much, so the X is actually aligned with Z. See that? When that happens, now what's really interesting here is that if you go to object mode and try to rotate on the Z direction, you'll see a lot of changes here on the rotation Y and X, like almost flipping. And look at the rotation X when I drag it. It's like becomes 80 something, right? And negative 80, right? Really fast changing because it has to flip it to really fulfill your needs. And that's what we call gimbal lock. And there's no way to avoid it if you really need that. So what you want to do is avoid gimbal lock as much as possible. Now the way to avoid it is actually the rule I was talking about earlier. You don't, or you just make the primary rotations, because that's going to be the most rotation you will have on the leg, right? Again, this gimbal lock will only happen when your rotate reaches more than 90 degrees here, right? So just avoid doing that by giving the rotation order's last axis here the primary rotation direction, or use Z here as the primary rotation direction. So here on the span, because the bending forward and the bending other direction, I think they're equally important, so I don't think it needs some tweaking. But if you wanted to, you can make the Z facing to this bending direction if that's going to be the primary one, right? You can probably change that. Okay, so that's just some of the things you can think about. Another rule here is that they don't have to be consistent. So the Z facing outwards here doesn't require or means that the Z's here also have to be facing sideways. There's no rule for that. Okay, so you can do whatever you want as long as everything will work eventually. Alright, that's a lot of explanation on how what the joint orient is, what the three different axes, what do they do, why they're is there any different, and the rotation order gimbal lock. I hope those things can help you a lot. Let me move on to do the last part of the body, which is the arm. Now it's actually also the most hard part here. Let me go start from the clavicle. I'm gonna click here to create my first clavicle joint and holding down shift, drag out for the shoulder. Alright, I'm gonna name this guy JT left, whoops, clavicle. And the other guy is JT left shoulder. Alright, now where do you position this shoulder is also depending on your character. I found out that oftentimes it's better to make it a little higher. Let me actually, why do I have sniping? Drag this downward a little bit. It's gonna be somewhere close to the middle of the shoulder, but also slightly biased to the top, and that's gonna make the top deformation easier, especially when you're doing a pose. That's actually gonna be a little bit more helpful to have it there. But of course you can do some testing and see which direction is better, because you can always redo it. After some testing, you can create the joint channel really fast, band it with the skin, and see if it deforms well. If it doesn't, reposition those joints. Alright, let me go to the top view here. I'm gonna go actually grab my joint and move them back to the middle of the body. Right. And then I'm gonna go start from the shoulder to the elbow to the wrist. Now notice that I'm doing it on the top view. Now the reason I'm doing that this way is because that's gonna give me a very straight bending. Now what do I mean straight? I mean straight by when I rotate it. Oops. When I rotate it, right, it's gonna keep the arm on the same plane. It's not gonna go away. Now if I do it in some other ways, like I can probably turn around the snap to the center of the geometry. If I do it that way, go from the shoulder to the elbow to the wrist. Now if you look at the orientation axis, this elbow rotation axis is actually slightly tilted downwards. Look at the Y direction. So when I rotate it, it's actually not rotating, just rotating or bending the elbow is also bending inwards. Look at that. So that's not what you want. And the reason being for that is because your joint chain is randomly placed there, not flat. Now a flat thing is always more stable than a tilted axis, so you don't want that. What you want to do is just do it in a flat way from a orthographic view, in this case the top view, and then you reposition those guys. So how do I even reposition those? It's actually very easy. Just go ahead and do the settings here on the joint orient. So I just need this guy to go down. It's gonna be the Z direction, right? So I'm gonna change the Z direction, or orient Z here, just to bring it down. It's that simple. And then it's not long enough to change the lens, just change the translate X of the object, right? And you'll be happy. And now it's going backwards too much, so I probably need to go back and change the Y to move it backwards just a little bit, and grab this guy and make it go back a little bit. And for this guy, I'm gonna rotate the Y. Oops, rotate the Y. And for the last guy here, change translate X. And I'm done with, whoops, not done, and it's tilting down too much, so let me go to the front view and do some changing on the Z this time, I guess, to bring it back. And now I still need some tweaking here, so let me do that to the side view and change the Y. No big deal, just do some tweaking. And this way, because we're using joint orient, we were being really careful so that it is really clean. When I rotate it on the Y direction, it's gonna be only rotating forward. Right? You can take a look at this joint. It's straight, it's flat here, and that's what we want. Alright, let me zero out the rotation here. Alright. Now let's talk about the wrist. The wrist for now is like aligned in a weird tilting way. I'm gonna zero its orientation out so that it's the same as the elbow. But like what I mentioned earlier, right? Any joint orientation should fulfill the animation needs for the object. So in this case, if you look at this model, the hand is slightly bending downwards. So I want that to here on my model, sorry, on my joint orient. So I'm gonna actually change the orientation Z just a little bit, so that it is actually pointing to the direction of the hand. Now there is no exact number for that. You just have to align them properly so that the rotation looks good enough. Okay, all right. So that's gonna be how you do those positioning of the arm joints. Now some of the rules here. For the shoulder, you can have translate X, even Y and Z. You can have whatever. You can have also whatever joint orients. For the elbow, you can only have translate X and joint orient. Now here let's talk about joint orient again. The rotation order is X, Y, Z. My primary bending direction is Y, so I'm going to change that to Y at the last. And so Y, Z, X is actually proper for this. So Y becomes the primary guy. If you go ahead and go to gimbal, you can see now Y is controlling everything now. Okay. And for others, this guy, Z is actually proper, so I'm going to keep that. And the same goes to the shoulder. Alright. So I'm going to I actually changed the rotation order for that particular reason I was talking about earlier. The primary bending direction should be the last in the rotation order. Alright, so that's going to be it for... Oh yeah, the last one here, another rule here. The last one here is that the wrist joint will have only translate X, and its joint orient can be anything, because the hand can be modeled in all sorts of different ways, especially from some ZBrush model, that those models can have the hand bended a little bit because they think that's more natural, right? No problem on that. Just make sure that you also bend your joint towards that direction too. Let me turn on that. Why do I have that? Alright, anyway, so if you fulfill those, you should be happy, or you should get a very stable result in the future. So let me rename these guys. This is going to be the JT left elbow, and this is going to be the JT left wrist. Okay. Now let's move on to the hand. The hand is actually not that complicated. It just have a lot of things, but all of those are simple. Let me go ahead and turn on this snap to the geometry center and go start creating the joints for the hand. I can actually isolate it so I can see it better. Let me go from the first joint to the second, third, and the last. Now let me check the orientation here. Again, the Z axis is in the default setting, the primary bending direction, and actually the only bending direction. Oh, in this case, you can probably bend other ways. You can actually do a little bit of that. But the primary ones will be the Z. And the Z here seems like it's tilted that way too much, so I'm going to tilt it this way back a little bit. So let me go ahead and do the X-axis to twist it. Alright, to make it bending towards a proper direction. I think that's probably good. And for others, let me actually grab them one by one and zero out their joint orients. So that's gonna essentially make the joint chain straight. I do that first, and then if the model is bended a little bit, which it is, especially here, I do need to bend it. I'm gonna use the Z here just to bend it downwards a little bit, maybe a little bit here too. Alright, and that's gonna be the joint chain for the sum. I think I need to maybe rotate on the Y. Oops, not the Y. It's actually the Y, or maybe the Z, just a little bit to make it align or position in the center of the joint chain. Alright, let me move on to other joints. It's gonna be the same thing. Okay, and again, check the axis is out tilted, not good at all. So let me change the X again to twist it back. That's the bending direction my index finger should have. Maybe just drag it backwards a little bit. Alright, and maybe forward just a little bit. I don't want it to deal with all the crazy weighting here, although the anatomy actually bending from there. Alright, so this guy, and I just need to zero out the joint orient. Make them flat first. and then do some tweaking if the joint is modeled in a bending way. Now you can see why the rigger is sometimes just asking the modelers to model things in a straight way, because it's just easier to set up. It doesn't mean the other ways cannot work. It's just harder. Alright, so that's gonna be the index. Let me Control D to duplicate this guy and move it to where the middle finger is. And I'm gonna do some tweaking again. So change the X, twist it backwards just a little bit, and on the Y too. And by the way, change those values holding down Control and middle mouse drag. If I didn't say that, I'm sorry. Middle mouse and drag to change that values. The values there. I'm really sorry about that if I never mentioned that before. Alright, anyway, let me change the it's okay. I can change those naming later. Let me change the Z a little bit here. Okay. And that can go forward just a little bit. Alright, let me go ahead and duplicate this guy again. Move it inwards. Sweep it on the Y direction. Tilt it on the X. Alright, and change the length. I can drag the X up in the axis parent. That's gonna be one of the ways you can change the X value only. And yeah, again, I can go change the orient to match it with the finger. Alright, one last joint here. I know this is a very long tutorial, but I just want to be really detailed on the joint placement, because that's going to be the first step you do on rigging, and probably the most important one. If this joint chain breaks at the very beginning of here, then it will not work properly and giving you a lot of headache in the future. So I just wanted this to be perfect. Alright. Alright, that's all the joint chain. Let me grab them all together and parent them back to the wrist joint. And some people may have another part of joint to mimic, you know, a lot of joint here in the middle, but you can create one here to mimic the other half of the hand. So you can probably do the bending of the palm a little bit of that. I'm not going to cover that much detail here yet. So let's just do it the simple way, right? It's easier to understand. I didn't even do any twisting joint here. We will actually do that in the giraffe rig later on. For now, it's just going to be empty for now. And because if you really want to make it twisting, it would be better to just create ribbons or X splines for the twisting. Alright, that's gonna be it for all the joints we need. Let me actually start renaming these guys. So modify, search and replace names, search for joints, rename with JT. Finger, apply. Right. And this guy will be the index. And this guy will be the middle. This guy will be the ring finger. The last one will be the pinky. Alright. And their numbers are all wrong, so I need to go ahead and fix that. It's gonna be 0, 1, 0, 2, 0, 3, 0, 4. 1, oops, 2, 0, 3, and 0, 4. Again, 1, 2, 3, and 4. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Oh, this is actually 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, cool. So now we have all the joints created on the left side. All we have to do is mirror those guys. Let me parent that back and grab that and do skeleton mirror joint to mirror it to the other side. Just to be safe, I'm gonna also go select hierarchy and do display, transform display local rotation axis, just to view all the axes and make sure that they're all working or aligned to the to a proper way. Alright, that's gonna be actually everything I want to show you today in the joint placement. I hope that all the information, although probably is too much for you, actually helps, because those things, although looks like smaller things, but they actually are the foundation of the rig, and they have to be properly managed to make the future rigging process more fluid and trouble-free. Alright. Okay, thanks for watching. See you next time.